Princess Lin Yu loved freedom. Unfortunately, freedom was the one thing a princess rarely possessed. The palace walls were beautiful. The gardens were breathtaking. The servants were kind. But none of it could compare to the excitement of the city beyond the gates. That was why Lin Yu had become an expert at escaping. Disguised in simple clothing, with her long hair hidden beneath a plain hood, she wandered through the bustling night market with a smile on her face. Lanterns illuminated the streets. Merchants called out to passing customers. Children laughed as they chased one another between the crowded stalls. For a few precious hours, Lin Yu could forget that she was a princess. Tonight was no different. Or so she thought. She had just purchased a small bag of sweet rice cakes when a strange feeling settled in her chest. Someone was watching her. At first, she ignored it. But when she turned down a quieter street, the feeling only grew stronger. Her steps slowed. A shadow moved behind her. Then another. Lin Yu's heart skipped a beat. She quickened her pace. The footsteps behind her did the same. Fear crept into her chest. Without thinking, she hurried into a narrow alley. It was a mistake. The moment she entered, 2 men stepped into her path. A third appeared behind her. Her breath caught. The alley suddenly felt much smaller, much darker. One of the men smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Looks like we finally found you." Lin Yu took a step backward. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She searched desperately for a way out. There was none. One of the men moved toward her. Then, everything happened at once. A sharp, metallic sound echoed through the alley. A sword flashed beneath the moonlight. The nearest attacker collapsed before he could even react. The second man barely had time to draw his weapon. A tall figure stepped between Lin Yu and the remaining attackers. Calm, silent, dangerous. His movements were impossibly fast. Every strike was precise, every step controlled. Within moments, both attackers lay defeated on the ground. Silence returned to the alley. Lin Yu stared at the stranger. He slowly lowered his sword. Moonlight reflected off the polished steel. Tall, broad shoulders, dark eyes, a face so calm it was almost unsettling. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he looked directly at her. "Your Highness." Lin Yu froze. Her disguise had failed. Again. "Who are you?" she asked. The man seemed almost surprised by the question. "As of today," he said evenly, "I am your new bodyguard." Lin Yu blinked. "My what? Your bodyguard? I never asked for one." A faint hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. No, his voice remained calm. "Your parents did." And at that moment, Princess Lin Yu decided that she already disliked him. Jian Hao escorted Lin Yu back to the palace. The entire journey was painfully quiet, mostly because Lin Yu refused to speak to him. Unfortunately, that did not seem to bother him at all. He simply walked beside her, calm, alert, as if nothing had happened, which only annoyed her even more. By the time they reached the palace gates, Lin Yu was ready to give him a piece of her mind. Instead, she was greeted by her parents. The king and queen were already waiting. The moment they saw her, relief washed across their faces. "Lin Yu!" The queen hurried forward and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "We were worried sick." Lin Yu sighed. "I'm fine, mother. You were followed by attackers. I'm still fine." The king folded his arms. "You were almost kidnapped." Lin Yu paused. "Fine. Slightly less fine." The queen laughed. The king tried not to. He failed. For a moment, the royal couple exchanged a look that spoke of many years spent together. The kind of look only 2 people deeply in love could share. Then the king's attention shifted toward Jian Hao. You found her? Yes, Your Majesty. And stopped the attackers? Yes, Your Majesty. The king nodded approvingly. The queen smiled warmly. Then it seems we chose well. Lin Yu groaned. Please don't tell me he's staying. He's staying, said the king. Father, no. Father, no. Father, no. The queen hid another smile behind her teacup. Lin Yu pointed dramatically at Jian Hao. He follows me everywhere. That is literally his job, the king replied. Lin Yu stared at her father. Her father stared back. Jian Hao remained completely expressionless. The queen finally intervened. Enough. Her voice was gentle. But somehow everyone listened. Jian Hao has been assigned to protect you. And that decision is final. Lin Yu crossed her arms. Jian Hao bowed respectfully. As you wish, Your Majesty. For some reason, that annoyed her even more. 3 days later, Lin Yu discovered that having a bodyguard was even worse than she had imagined. Whenever she walked through the palace, he was there. Whenever she visited the gardens, he was there. Whenever she went to the library, he was there. Whenever she turned around, he was there. Watching. Waiting. Protecting. It was unbearable. One afternoon, she finally snapped. Do you ever leave? Jian Hao looked at her. No. Do you ever stop watching me? No. Do you enjoy making my life difficult? A brief pause. Then, no. Lin Yu threw her hands into the air. This is ridiculous. Jian Hao seemed completely unbothered. Your safety is my responsibility. There is no danger inside the palace. There was also no danger at the night market. Lin Yu opened her mouth, then closed it again. Unfortunately, he had a point. Several days later, she decided to solve the problem herself. If Jian Hao could always find her, then she would simply become harder to find. Much harder. That morning, she slipped away while visiting the palace gardens. She crossed a small bridge, passed through a bamboo grove, and hid inside an abandoned pavilion rarely used by anyone. Finally, peace, silence, victory. Lin Yu smiled to herself. She had done it. For the first time, she had escaped him. Then a familiar voice spoke behind her. You chose the same hiding place as last week. Lin Yu nearly jumped out of her skin. She spun around. Jian Hao stood calmly near the entrance, as if he had been there the entire time. Her eyes widened. How did you find me? You're predictable. Lin Yu stared at him, completely offended. Jian Hao looked away, but not before she caught it. The smallest hint of amusement. Almost a smile. And for the very first time, Lin Yu found herself wanting to see it again. A few days later, Lin Yu woke before sunrise. At first, she did not know what had disturbed her sleep. Then she heard it. The distant sound of steel cutting through the morning air. Once. Twice. Again. Curiosity got the better of her. Pulling a light robe around her shoulders, she quietly slipped from her chambers and followed the sound through the still sleeping palace. The corridors were empty, the garden silent. Even the birds had not yet begun their morning songs. The sound led her to a secluded training yard hidden behind a row of old pine trees. And there, she stopped. Jian Hao was alone. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the stone courtyard, casting long shadows over the ground. His sword moved through the air in a silver blur, fast, precise, effortless. Lin Yu had seen warriors train before, but never like this. Never with such control. Never with such confidence. Every movement flowed seamlessly into the next, as though the sword were not a weapon, but simply a part of him, His dark training tunic had been loosened at the collar. His arms flexed with every strike. Strong, powerful, years of discipline visible in every movement. The sharp line of his jaw tightened with concentration as he trained. Morning light traced the strong contours of his face, his dark brows, his straight nose, the calm intensity in his eyes. Everything about him radiated quiet confidence, the confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was. A sheen of sweat glistened across his skin beneath the golden morning light. A single drop slid slowly down the side of his neck. He didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. His dark hair had fallen loose from its usual tie. Several strands clung to his forehead. Others moved gently with the breeze. For the first time, Jian Hao did not look like an untouchable bodyguard. He looked like a man, a very handsome man, a very dangerous man, a man any woman would notice, and somehow, that realization made Lin Yu's heart beat a little faster. The sword flashed again. A sharp turn, a powerful strike, then another. His movements were beautiful, not in a delicate way, not graceful like a dancer, but beautiful in the way a storm was beautiful. Strong, certain, impossible to ignore. Without realizing it, Lin Yu found herself staring, completely staring. She barely even blinked. Then, the sword stopped, instantly, as though someone had frozen time itself. Lin Yu's stomach dropped, slowly. Jian Hao turned his head. Their eyes met. She froze. He had noticed her. Of course he had noticed her. A man like Jian Hao probably noticed everything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she saw it. The smallest change in his expression, a faint curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close, very close. And somehow, that tiny, almost smile felt more dangerous than any sword he carried. "Your Highness." His voice was calm, as always. But there was something different in it today. Something warmer. Lin Yu immediately looked away, far too late. He had already caught her staring. Heat rushed into her cheeks. "I was not watching you." The words left her mouth far too quickly. Jian Hao raised one eyebrow. The almost smile deepened slightly. "I see." Lin Yu wished the ground would open beneath her. "I was only trying to figure out who was making so much noise before sunrise." Of course, his tone remained perfectly respectful, which somehow made everything worse. "I merely wished to ensure my bodyguard was doing his job properly." "I am relieved to hear that." Lin Yu narrowed her eyes. Jian Hao's expression remained calm, but she was almost certain he was enjoying this, a little too much. Before she could think of another excuse, he bent down and picked up a small wooden practice sword lying near the edge of the courtyard. Then he held it out toward her. Lin Yu blinked. "What is that for?" "You seem very interested in training." She stared at him, then at the wooden sword, then back at him. Realization dawned. "You are making fun of me." For the first time, Jian Hao actually smiled, only briefly, only for a second. But it transformed his entire face, and to Lin Yu's great annoyance, it made him even more handsome. Much, much more handsome. Later that afternoon, Lin Yu sat in her chambers reading, or at least pretending to read. Her thoughts kept wandering back to the training yard, back to the sunlight, back to the sword, back to Jian Hao. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. One of the palace servants entered carrying a small tray. "Your Highness." The servant placed it on the table. Lin Yu looked down and immediately smiled. Sweet rice cakes, her favorite. Exactly the kind she had mentioned once during a conversation several days earlier. She looked up. "Who brought these?" The servant hesitated, then smiled. "The Lord Bodyguard asked that they be delivered." Lin Yu looked down at the sweets once more. Slowly, a smile appeared on her own face. Perhaps. Jian Hao listened more carefully than she had thought. The annual Lantern Festival was one of the most anticipated celebrations in the kingdom. For 3 nights, the capital transformed into a sea of light. Lanterns hung from rooftops. Music filled the streets. Merchants sold food and sweets from every corner of the city. And for the first time in weeks, Lin Yu found herself genuinely excited. The moment she entered the breakfast hall, her parents immediately noticed. "Someone seems unusually cheerful today." The queen smiled over the rim of her teacup. Lin Yu rolled her eyes. "I'm always cheerful." The king nearly choked on his tea. The queen laughed. Lin Yu pointed at both of them. "You are impossible." "We learn from the best," the king replied. The queen nodded in agreement. Lin Yu groaned. Unfortunately, Jian Hao happened to witness the entire exchange. And even more unfortunately, she could have sworn she saw amusement in his eyes. Again. That evening, the palace prepared for the festival. Servants moved through the halls carrying lanterns. Musicians tuned their instruments. Guests from noble families arrived one after another. Lin Yu stood before a mirror while her attendants adjusted the final details of her robe. Soft blue silk, silver embroidery, delicate hair ornaments. When she finally stepped into the palace courtyard, conversations seemed to pause for a moment. Several young noblemen immediately turned their heads. Lin Yu barely noticed. Someone else did. Jian Hao, standing several steps away, watching over the crowd, protecting her as always. For just a moment, his eyes met hers. Something flickered across his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. But it was there. Lin Yu was certain of it. And strangely, that mattered far more than the attention of every nobleman present. Much later that evening, the royal family left the palace to visit the city festival. Thousands of lanterns illuminated the streets. Golden light danced across smiling faces. Children ran through the crowds. Street performers entertained eager audiences. For a brief moment, Lin Yu forgot she was a princess. She felt like a normal young woman again, and somehow, that feeling became even better, knowing Jian Hao was beside her. Not behind her. Not watching from afar. Beside her. Close enough that she could hear his footsteps. Close enough that she could hear his voice. Close enough to notice things she had never noticed before. Like how surprisingly gentle he was with children. Or how respectfully he treated elderly merchants. Or how he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger without even thinking about it. The more she learned about him, the harder it became to remember why she had disliked him in the first place. The deeper they ventured into the Lantern Festival, the more crowded the streets became. People filled every corner of the city. Families, merchants, musicians, travelers from distant provinces. Everywhere Lin Yu looked, she saw lanterns glowing against the night sky. It was beautiful, almost magical. For a while, she forgot about everything else. Forgot about the palace. Forgot about royal duties. Forgot about the future. She was so distracted by the sights around her that she failed to notice the crowd shifting around them. Until suddenly, Jian Hao was no longer beside her. Lin Yu stopped. Her heart skipped a beat. People moved in every direction. Voices surrounded her. Music echoed through the street, but Jian Hao was nowhere to be seen. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Just wrong. Then a familiar hand closed gently around her wrist. Lin Yu turned. Jian Hao stood behind her. His expression remained calm, as always. You wandered off. Relief washed through her so quickly that it almost annoyed her. I did not. You did. I knew exactly where I was. His eyebrow lifted slightly. Neither of them believed that. Without another word, Jian Hao guided her back through the crowd. His hand remained around her wrist. Firm, protective, warm. For some reason, Lin Yu became very aware of that warmth, far more aware than she should have been. When they finally reached a quieter section of the street, Jian Hao immediately released her. The absence of his touch felt strangely noticeable. Much too noticeable. Lin Yu quickly pushed the thought away. Surely she was imagining things. Surely. A little later, they stopped at a small lantern stall. Hundreds of colorful lanterns hung overhead, some shaped like flowers, others like birds or dragons. Lin Yu's eyes lit up. For several minutes, she examined every lantern with the enthusiasm of a child. Jian Hao watched quietly from nearby. Then she picked up a small lantern shaped like a rabbit. Look. Forgetting herself completely, she turned toward him, holding it up proudly. For a moment, their eyes met. The lantern's warm glow illuminated her face, and for the briefest second, Jian Hao simply stared, as though he had forgotten what she had asked. Then he cleared his throat. It suits you. Lin Yu blinked. What does that mean? His gaze shifted toward the lantern. It is stubborn. For a moment there was silence. Then Lin Yu gasped. You are insulting me. It was an observation. You're definitely insulting me. A faint smile appeared in his eyes. Again, that same smile, the one she was beginning to like far too much. Hours passed. The festival only grew busier. Eventually, the crowd became so dense that moving through it was nearly impossible. Lin Yu found herself pressed closer and closer to Jian Hao. People constantly pushed past them, leaving little space between them. Then, another wave of people surged through the street. Instinctively, Jian Hao reached for her hand. Not her wrist this time. Her hand. His fingers closed around hers. Strong, certain, protective. For a moment, Lin Yu forgot how to breathe. Jian Hao did not seem to notice, or perhaps he did. But if he did, he gave no sign. Without letting go, he guided her safely through the crowd, past dozens of lanterns, past food stalls, past musicians and performers. And all the while, Lin Yu remained painfully aware of the warmth of his hand around hers. Eventually, the crowd began to thin. Only then did Jian Hao finally release her. His attention immediately returned to their surroundings, scanning for danger, focused on his duty, as though nothing unusual had happened. Lin Yu stared at him, completely speechless, because something unusual had happened, at least to her. And for the rest of the evening, she could not stop thinking about it. By the time they returned to the palace, the Lantern Festival was beginning to wind down. The city still glowed beneath thousands of lanterns, but the crowds had thinned, the music had softened, and a strange quietness seemed to linger in the air. Lin Yu should have been tired. Instead, she found herself unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the warmth of Jian Hao's hand around hers, the way he had guided her through the crowd, the way he had looked at her beneath the lantern light, and most frustrating of all, the way her heart had reacted to every single one of those things. Hours later, a small celebration was still taking place within the palace. Guests lingered in the gardens. Musicians played softly beneath the stars. Servants carried trays of food and wine between groups of laughing nobles. Lin Yu accepted a cup of rice wine, then another, and perhaps one more than she should have. Not enough to lose control, just enough to stop overthinking every thought, just enough to become brave or reckless, possibly both. Eventually, needing fresh air, she slipped away from the gathering and made her way toward one of the palace terraces. The night sky stretched endlessly above her. Thousands of lanterns floated in the distance like stars. For a few moments, she simply stood there, enjoying the silence. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around. She already knew. Jian Hao. Of course it was Jian Hao. "Your Highness." His voice was calm, familiar, dangerously familiar. Lin Yu smiled faintly. "Are you following me again?" "It would be concerning if I wasn't." She laughed softly. And to her surprise, so did he. Only a little, but enough. Enough to send an unexpected flutter through her chest. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Somehow, it felt easy, natural, as though standing together beneath the stars had become the most ordinary thing in the world. Then Lin Yu looked out across the glowing city and asked quietly, "Have you ever wanted something you weren't allowed to have?" The question hung between them. For the first time that evening, Jian Hao didn't answer immediately. His expression shifted, only slightly. But she noticed, because she had begun noticing everything about him. Finally, he spoke. "Yes." Her heart skipped, just once. "What was it?" Jian Hao looked at her for a long moment. Neither of them looked away. Then he said quietly, "Something I could never have." The air suddenly felt different, heavier, warmer, more dangerous. Lin Yu's pulse quickened, because somehow she knew they were no longer talking about abstract things. Not really. And judging by the look in Jian Hao's eyes, he knew it too. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The world seemed to shrink until only the two of them remained. The lanterns, the stars, the night. None of it mattered anymore. Only him. Only her. Lin Yu took a step closer, then another. Close enough now to see every detail of his face. Close enough to hear his breathing. Close enough that turning back suddenly felt impossible. Her heart was pounding. She knew she should stop. She knew this was a mistake. She knew exactly how complicated everything would become. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to care. Not tonight. Not anymore. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to his. Then, before courage could abandon her, she kissed him. Softly. Briefly. Just enough to steal his breath away. For one stunned moment. Jian Hao didn't move, as though he could hardly believe what had happened. Then, very gently, he kissed her back. And for that single, perfect moment, the rest of the world disappeared. But only for a moment, because reality always returns. Slowly, Jian Hao stepped back. The warmth vanished. The distance returned. And Lin Yu's heart sank. Jian Hao. His jaw tightened. The conflict in his eyes was impossible to miss. "Your Highness!" The title hurt far more than it should have. "We shouldn't." Lin Yu stared at him, unable to speak, unable to breathe, because deep down, she already knew what he meant. Princess, bodyguard, duty, responsibility, all the things standing between them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Jian Hao bowed, Formal, controlled, professional, as though the kiss had never happened, as though it had meant nothing. And somehow, that hurt most of all. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Lin Yu alone beneath the stars, watching him disappear into the darkness, and wondering why the most beautiful night of her life suddenly felt so painful. The next morning, Lin Yu woke with only one thought on her mind: the kiss. For a brief moment, a smile appeared on her face. Then she remembered how the night had ended, and the smile vanished. Surely things would be awkward. Surely Jian Hao would avoid her. Surely he would not know how to act around her. Instead, he was exactly the same, which somehow felt worse. Much worse. When she entered the breakfast hall, Jian Hao was already there, standing at his usual position near the entrance. Calm, professional, unreadable, as though nothing had happened, as though he had never kissed her beneath the stars, as though her heart had not been keeping her awake half the night. The queen immediately noticed her daughter's mood. Lin Yu looked up. What? The queen smiled into her tea. You seem disappointed. I'm not disappointed. Of course not. The king looked between them, completely confused, then shrugged and returned to his breakfast. The queen's smile widened. Lin Yu groaned. The conversation ended there, thankfully. Unfortunately, the day only became more frustrating from that point onward, because Jian Hao had become even more formal than usual. Every sentence began with, "Your Highness." Every answer was polite. Every interaction perfectly professional. It was unbearable. Several times, Lin Yu deliberately tried to speak with him. Several times, he politely ended the conversation. Several times, she considered throwing something at him. Nothing dangerous, just annoying. Very annoying. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. And still, nothing changed. Until finally, Lin Yu lost patience. Completely. One afternoon, she cornered him in the palace gardens. Jian Hao immediately sensed danger. Unfortunately for him, it was not the life-threatening kind. "Your Highness." "No." He blinked. "No. No titles." A pause. Then another. Jian Hao already knew where this conversation was heading, and he clearly wanted no part of it. Lin Yu stepped directly into his path, preventing any possible escape. "You've been avoiding me." "I have not." "You have." "I haven't." "You absolutely have." His jaw tightened slightly, a very bad sign. For him, not for her. Lin Yu was finally getting somewhere. "I am performing my duties exactly as I always have." "Oh, really?" "Yes." "Then look at me." His eyes immediately met hers. And suddenly, the argument became far more difficult. Because now, she remembered exactly why she had wanted his attention in the first place. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jian Hao looked away first. That tiny victory gave her far more satisfaction than it should have. "Why?" she asked quietly. This time, he did not pretend not to understand. The playful tone disappeared. The smiles vanished. Only honesty remained, because there was no escaping the question anymore. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, "Because I cannot afford to forget who you are." Lin Yu's heart sank. "There it is." Jian Hao remained silent. "You keep talking as though I am a title." His expression softened, only slightly, but enough. "You are a princess, and you are Jian Hao." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. For the first time, something vulnerable appeared in his eyes, something she had never seen before. It lasted only a second. Then it was gone. "I am your bodyguard." The words sounded almost painful, as though he hated them as much as she did. Lin Yu stared at him, then took a slow step forward, closing some of the distance between them. "You kiss me too." A muscle tightened in his jaw. The reaction was immediate and impossible to miss. "Good. Let him suffer a little too." "You kiss me back," she continued, his eyes closed briefly, as though she was making this incredibly difficult, which she absolutely was. Lin Yu. It was the first time he had said her name. Not Your Highness, not Princess. Lin Yu. The sound of it sent warmth rushing through her chest. They both noticed. Neither mentioned it. For several long seconds, they simply stood there, caught between duty and desire, between reason and feeling, between everything they wanted and everything they believed they could not have. Then voices echoed from somewhere nearby, servants approaching. The moment shattered instantly. Jian Hao stepped back. The walls returned, the distance returned, the mask returned. But this time, Lin Yu had seen what lay beneath it, and so had he. As the servants approached, Jian Hao bowed respectfully. Once again, the perfect bodyguard. Once again, the loyal protector. But now, neither of them could pretend anymore. Because the truth had finally been spoken. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough to change everything. Several days passed. Outwardly, everything appeared normal. The palace continued its daily rhythm. Meetings, banquets, ceremonies. Guests came and went. Servants hurried through the halls. Life moved forward. But for Lin Yu and Jian Hao, nothing felt normal anymore. The words they had exchanged in the garden lingered between them, unspoken, unresolved, impossible to ignore. And yet, neither of them knew how to move forward, or if they even should. One evening, the royal family attended a formal gathering hosted by one of the kingdom's most influential noble families. The celebration lasted well into the night. Music echoed through the estate. Guests laughed beneath strings of lanterns. Everything seemed peaceful, safe, ordinary, which was exactly why nobody noticed the danger. At first. By the time the gathering ended, most of the guests had already departed. Lin Yu and Jian Hao walked several steps ahead of the others as they made their way through a quiet section of the estate gardens. Moonlight spilled across the stone path. The night air was cool. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then, Lin Yu glanced toward him. "You know." Jian Hao looked at her. "What?" A small smile touched her lips. "You still owe me a training lesson." To her satisfaction, the corner of his mouth twitched. Barely, but she saw it. "I do not recall agreeing to that. You offered me a practice sword. That was a mistake." Lin Yu laughed softly. The sound seemed to brighten the night around them. For a brief moment, everything felt easy again. Then the first attacker appeared. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, sword already drawn, moving fast, very fast. Jian Hao reacted instantly. His own blade flashed into his hand. Steel collided with steel. The sound echoed through the gardens. Lin Yu stumbled backward. Her heart immediately leapt into her throat. A second attacker emerged from the darkness. Jian Hao shifted position without hesitation, placing himself directly between Lin Yu and both enemies. As always, protecting her first, thinking about himself second. The fight was fierce, but not long. The first attacker fell quickly. The second lasted only slightly longer. Jian Hao's skill was overwhelming, every strike precise, every movement controlled. For a moment, it seemed the danger had already passed. Then Lin Yu saw it. A flicker of movement high above them. Her eyes lifted toward the rooftops overlooking the garden. And there, hidden in the darkness, stood a third attacker, a bow already raised, an arrow already aimed. At first she could not breathe, could not think, could not move. Then instinct took over. "Jian Hao!" Her scream shattered the night. Jian Hao turned immediately. His eyes found hers, then followed her gaze upward. He saw the archer too late. The bowstring snapped. The arrow flew. Without thinking, Lin Yu ran toward him. Without thinking, Jian Hao ran toward her. Everything happened in an instant. He reached her first, wrapped one arm around her waist, and pulled her behind him. The arrow struck. A sickening impact echoed through the garden. Lin Yu froze. For one terrible moment, she did not understand what had happened. Then she saw the blood. The arrow had buried itself deep into Jian Hao's shoulder. His body jerked from the force, yet somehow, he remained standing. The third attacker had already abandoned the rooftop. Gone before anyone could pursue him. The danger was over, at least for now. Jian Hao took one step, then another, as though nothing had happened, as though he had not just been shot. "Jian Hao." Her voice trembled. He looked at her. The color was already draining from his face, yet somehow, he still managed a faint smile. A scratch. Lin Yu stared at him in disbelief. A scratch? His knees buckled. The smile vanished. And suddenly, the strongest man she had ever known collapsed. "Jian Hao!" Lin Yu dropped beside him. Her hands immediately reached for him, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to keep him awake, trying not to panic, failing miserably. Blood stained her hands, her clothes, her heart, everything. "Stay with me," her voice broke. "Please." Jian Hao's eyes struggled to remain open. Even then, even injured, even barely conscious, his attention remained on her, not on himself. On her. "Are you hurt?" The question shattered something inside her. Tears immediately filled her eyes. "No." Her voice trembled. "No. Because of you." Jian Hao seemed relieved. Actually relieved. As though nothing else mattered. As though the arrow in his shoulder were completely irrelevant. As long as she was safe. The palace physicians worked through the entire night. Servants rushed through the corridors carrying bowls of water, clean cloths, and medicine. Guards stood watch outside the royal infirmary. No one dared speak too loudly. No one dared relax. Because the kingdom's most trusted bodyguard lay unconscious behind those doors, and because everyone knew exactly why. He had taken an arrow meant for someone else, for Princess Lin Yu. Hours passed, then more. The night stretched endlessly onward. Yet Lin Yu never left, not once. She remained beside Jian Hao's bed while the physicians worked. She remained after they left. She remained even after her parents arrived. The queen quietly sat beside her daughter. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then the queen gently placed a hand over hers. "Lin Yu." Only then did her daughter realize she had been crying. Again, the queen's expression softened. "My dear." Lin Yu lowered her eyes. "I almost lost him." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. The queen followed her gaze toward Jian Hao. Pale, motionless, far too still. For the first time, the queen seemed to understand the full truth, not just what had happened, but what Jian Hao had become to her daughter. The queen squeezed her hand gently, then rose to her feet, giving her daughter the privacy she needed. Before leaving, she paused beside the door and smiled sadly. Because some things only a mother notices. The room grew quiet again. Only the soft crackling of lantern light remained. Lin Yu looked at Jian Hao, at the man who had changed everything, the man she had once considered nothing more than an inconvenience, the man she now could not imagine losing. Slowly, she reached for his hand. His hand was warm. Thank heaven. Warm. A fresh wave of emotion hit her unexpectedly. Memories flooded her mind. The alley, the training yard, the lantern festival, the terrace, the kiss, every moment, every smile, every glance, every touch, all leading here, to this room, to this fear, to this unbearable feeling inside her chest. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another and another. She did not bother wiping them away. There was no point anymore. For a long time, she simply sat beside him, holding his hand, praying, begging, waiting. Then finally, his fingers moved. At first, she thought she had imagined it. Then it happened again. Lin Yu immediately sat upright. Her heart nearly stopped. Jian Hao. No response. Then, slowly, his eyes opened. Relief hit her so hard she almost laughed, or cried, perhaps both. Jian Hao, his gaze slowly focused, finding her almost immediately. Even now, even after everything, the first thing he looked for was her. A faint frown appeared. Why are you crying? The question was so absurd that Lin Yu actually laughed through her tears. Because you're impossible. His lips twitched slightly, the closest thing to a smile he could currently manage. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Neither wanted to break the fragile peace that had settled between them. Then Jian Hao noticed their hands, still intertwined. Neither of them let go. Neither of them seemed interested in letting go. For the first time in days, there were no walls between them, no titles, no duties, no excuses, only honesty. And honesty was dangerous, especially now, especially here. Lin Yu looked down, then back at him. Her voice trembled slightly. I thought you were going to die. The words hung in the air, heavy, painfully honest. Jian Hao's expression softened. Lin Yu. Hearing her name and his voice nearly shattered what remained of her composure. She shook her head. No. Tears filled her eyes again. No. Let me finish. For once, he obeyed. I was terrified. Her voice broke. I didn't care about royal duties. I didn't care about appearances. I didn't care what anyone would think. All she cared about was him. More tears slipped down her cheeks. She swallowed hard, then finally said the truth she could no longer hide. When I thought I might lose you, her fingers tightened around his. Nothing else mattered. Silence. Complete silence. The kind that changes everything. For a long moment, Jian Hao simply stared at her, as though he had forgotten how to breathe, as though the words meant more than he knew how to handle. And perhaps they did, because for the first time since they had met, Jian Hao looked completely defenseless, not wounded, not weak, simply human. Then very slowly, he lifted his free hand and brushed away a tear from her cheek, a gesture so gentle it nearly broke her heart. Lin Yu. Her name sounded different this time, warmer, softer, filled with things he still could not quite say aloud. Jian Hao recovered slowly. The physicians insisted he remain in bed for several more days, a recommendation he ignored almost immediately, much to everyone's frustration, especially Lin Yu's. You were shot by an arrow. It was my shoulder. You nearly died. I did not. You almost did. Jian Hao considered this, then nodded. Almost. Lin Yu stared at him, completely unimpressed. To her annoyance, he looked far too pleased with himself. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was finally returning to normal. Almost. Because one problem remained, the same problem that had always existed, the same problem that refused to disappear. Princess. Bodyguard. The words lingered between them like an invisible wall. And despite everything that had happened, Jian Hao still refused to walk through it. Several days later, Lin Yu discovered exactly how serious that problem was. She found him standing alone in one of the palace gardens shortly before sunset. The wound had not fully healed yet, but he was already back on his feet. Typical. The moment he noticed her approaching, he straightened, as though preparing for battle. Unfortunately for him, this battle was her. "You are avoiding me again." Jian Hao sighed quietly, not a promising start. "Lin Yu." The sound of her name still made her heart flutter, even now, especially now. "You deserve better." There it was, the sentence she had secretly feared, the sentence she had secretly expected. Lin Yu folded her arms. "No," Jian Hao frowned. "No, no. You are a princess, and you deserve someone worthy of you." Lin Yu stared at him for several seconds, then shook her head, almost laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. "Do you know what is truly annoying about you?" Jian Hao looked genuinely concerned, which only encouraged her. "You keep deciding what I deserve." Silence. "Did it ever occur to you that I might want to decide that myself?" For once, Jian Hao had no answer. Lin Yu stepped closer, then closer still. The distance between them disappeared. "What if I don't want a prince?" His jaw tightened. "What if I don't care about titles?" The conflict in his eyes was becoming impossible to hide. Good. Let him feel it too. "What if—" her voice softened. "What if the future I want includes you?" For a moment, Jian Hao simply stared at her. Every part of him wanted to say yes. Every part of him wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms, to stop pretending. But years of discipline do not disappear easily, neither do years of duty. Slowly, he took a step back. The movement was small, yet it felt like a blade through her heart. Lin Yu's smile faded. Of course. What had she expected? He was choosing duty. Again. She lowered her eyes, trying not to let him see how much it hurt. "Right." The single word came out quieter than she intended. Then she forced a smile, a painful one. "I understand." But the truth was, she didn't. Not at all. She turned away. One step, then another, trying to leave with whatever dignity she still had left. Behind her, silence. Then suddenly, Lin Yu, his voice, low, rough, different. Her heart stopped. Before she could turn around, fingers closed around her wrist, gentle, yet firm enough to stop her. She froze. For one long heartbeat. Neither of them moved. Then Jian Hao pulled her back toward him. Not hard, not forcefully. Just enough. Enough that she found herself standing right in front of him once more. Close. Far too close. His eyes searched hers, as though looking for permission, as though fighting the last battle he would ever fight against himself, and losing completely. "Do you have any idea?" His voice broke slightly, the first crack she had ever heard in his composure. "How difficult you make this." Lin Yu could barely breathe, because this was no longer the bodyguard speaking. This was Jian Hao. Just Jian Hao. The man who loved her, the man who had nearly died for her, the man who had been trying to let her go, and couldn't. Not anymore. Not ever. Then he kissed her, not cautiously, not politely, not like the stolen kiss beneath the stars. This was months of longing finally breaking free, months of restraint, months of wanting, months of pretending. Gone. His hand rose to the side of her face, holding her as though she were something precious, something irreplaceable. The world disappeared. The palace, the kingdom, the titles, the future. None of it mattered. Only this moment. Only him. Only her. And for the first time since they had met, neither of them tried to pull away. The following morning, Lin Yu woke with a smile she could not hide. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered Jian Hao, his voice, his touch, the way he had looked at her, the way he had kissed her, and for the first time in a very long time, the future no longer felt frightening. It felt hopeful. Unfortunately, that feeling lasted exactly until breakfast. A palace servant appeared outside her chambers. "Your Highness, the King and Queen request your presence." Immediately, Lin Yu became suspicious, very suspicious. Several minutes later, she entered her parents' private sitting room and froze, because Jian Hao was already there, standing beside the window, looking every bit as uncomfortable as she suddenly felt. Oh no, the Queen smiled. The King smiled. That made everything worse, much worse. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the Queen sighed dramatically. "Well, it's about time." Lin Yu closed her eyes, briefly considering whether she could still escape through the door. The answer was, unfortunately, no. "Mother," the Queen waved a dismissive hand. "My dear, please." "We've known for months." Lin Yu nearly choked. "Months?" The King nodded. "At least." The Queen smiled into her tea. "The way you looked at him. The way he looked at you. Neither of you were particularly subtle." Lin Yu immediately looked at Jian Hao. To her horror, he appeared just as embarrassed as she felt. The King laughed. That alone should tell you how obvious it was. The Queen nodded. "Every time you entered a room, he watched you. Every time he entered a room, you watched him." Lin Yu wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Immediately, the Queen's smile softened. "My dear, we never cared whether your heart chose a prince, or a nobleman, or anyone else." The King's expression grew gentler. "We only cared that whoever earned your heart was worthy of it." His eyes shifted toward Jian Hao. "And after everything he has done," the King's smile returned, "I would say he has earned it." For a moment, nobody spoke. Emotion tightened in Lin Yu's chest. Beside her, Jian Hao lowered his head respectfully, clearly struggling to find words, which was somehow adorable. The Queen suddenly clapped her hands together. "Excellent!" The King blinked. "What? Now we can finally settle our argument?" Lin Yu frowned. "What argument?" The Queen looked delighted. "The names of your children." Silence. Complete silence. Then, "What?" The King pointed at his wife. "I told you she'd react like that." Of course she would. Normal people do not discuss their future grandchildren before their daughter is even engaged. The Queen looked deeply offended. "I was planning ahead." The King scoffed. "You started planning 6 months ago." The Queen ignored him. "I still like Wei." "No." The King folded his arms. "Too common. Wei is a perfectly respectable name. It lacks imagination." The argument continued immediately, as though it had never stopped. Lin Yu stared. Jian Hao stared. Neither knew what to say. Then, slowly, Lin Yu began to laugh. A real laugh. Bright, warm, unstoppable. The Queen smiled. The King smiled. And for the first time, Jian Hao smiled too. A genuine smile. Not hidden. Not restrained. Completely real. The Queen immediately pointed. "There. That smile. That's the one. No wonder she fell in love with you." "Mother." The Queen laughed. The King laughed. Even Jian Hao looked dangerously close to laughing. And somehow, for the first time since all of this had begun, everything felt easy. Later that evening, Lin Yu and Jian Hao stood together on the same terrace where everything had changed. The city glowed beneath them. Lanterns flickered in the distance. The evening breeze carried the sounds of laughter from somewhere far below. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Lin Yu looked up at him. "So?" Jian Hao raised an eyebrow. "So?" A smile tugged at her lips. "What happens now?" For a moment, he simply looked at her. Then he reached for her hand, the same hand he had once held to guide her safely through a crowd. Only now, he had no intention of letting go. A faint smile appeared on his lips. For the first time in my life, his fingers intertwined with hers. I have absolutely no idea. Lin Yu laughed, and together, they watched the lights of the city below. No longer a princess and her bodyguard, just Lin Yu and Jian Hao, facing the future together, whatever it might bring.